started. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay in bed. Then he wrote them down and related the following summary. The first year of Belshazzar, which would make it 553 BC. 553 BC. This is 50 years after the events of chapter 2. So we're moving forward 50 years in history from the events of chapter 2. Nebuchadnezzar had been dead for 10 years. But actually, the book of Daniel is not in chronological order, because chapter 6 leaves off in 538 BC. Wait a minute, does history have a forward and back button or something? Was Daniel sitting there with like a stereo hitting fast forward, fast reverse, fast forward, fast reverse? Wait a minute, does history have a forward and back button or something? Was Daniel sitting there with like a stereo hitting fast forward, fast reverse, fast forward, fast reverse? I thought Scripture was without error. You've been talking about how Scripture doesn't have an error, Cliff. What are you talking about? I thought these stories were true. Are you now saying, Cliff, that those doubting liberal critical scholars were right? Nope, they're still wrong. But the Hebrew people did not have our way of talking about history. They do not talk about history like we do. It is not a modern way of looking at history. We look at the telling of history as a linear event, where you start with the earliest event, and you move on and on and on. For example, the American Revolution, you talk about the acts that led up to the Boston Tea Party, the Stamp Act and Tea Act, all that stuff. Then you talk about the Intelligencer Acts. Then you talk about the Second Continental Congress. Then you talk about the Declaration of Independence. Then you talk about the American War of Independence, and then you talk about the winning of the American War of Independence, and so on and so forth. That's the way we talk about history. That is not the way the Hebrew people talk about history. They saw that history was linear. They clearly saw that. But when they were telling the tales of history, they did not tell it in the order that it happened. Rather, they were concerned with the deeper meaning of the events. So they arranged the events in their historical tales to reflect the meaning. They often told tales out of order to show the deeper meaning. This is seen other places in Scripture. Other places in Scripture as well. For example, the 3 gospel accounts are written by people of Hebrew backgrounds, tell the same story in a different order to reflect the authorial intent of the person who's writing it down. Now, these events are historical, and taking the 4 gospels together, you can put them in the historical order, or something resembling the historical order. But they are historical events, and they're accurately told about, but they're in different orders because of different intents by the author. Or the book of Judges is told out of order. It's actually told in a bizarre order, where it tells things at the beginning of the times, and at the middle of the times, and at the end of the times, and back at the beginning of the times, and it's all set up like a big X through it to show what's important in the end. Okay? So this is called parallelism. Parallelism. It's a common Hebrew communication technique. Now, to us it means little. It sounds like they're repeating itself. This is not how we communicate. Modern English is concerned with brevity, or being brief, not with delicate highlighting like Hebrew. The Hebrew people did think differently than we do. They didn't know what a DVD was. They didn't know what a CD. How did they live without a DVD? Think about it. How did they live without a DVD player? I've only had a DVD player for, a couple of years, like maybe 5-6 years. I don't know how I lived without it. Or a CD player. How did they live without that? Well, they did. Okay. The Hebrew people thought differently than we do. They took time and care in our writing, where much more than we tend to do. Not to say that people today don't take care with their writing, but they did it more than we tend to do. Now, parallelism, as I said, was a Hebrew technique, and it relied on constructing parallel descriptions. Now, they could be synonymous meanings where you add the meanings together, like God is holy, God is just, God is great, God is love. That's not a little parallelism, that would be the sample. God is, and you add all the things he's described as, you have a better picture of God. That's called synonymous parallelism. But this one is called antithetical parallelism, where you're looking for the differences in the descriptions. The differences are the key. In this case, Daniel 7 is a text to remind the reader of the events in Daniel chapter 2. How do I know that? Because Because Daniel chapter 2 starts off with the following statement. Now in the second year of the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Where this one started, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay in bed. Both discussed a year and the reign of a king. Both discussed dreams. To the Hebrew mind, this was like shouting in this, like in big bold text. Compare this to the earlier text. In big bold red letters. It's like shouting for a comparison. As they would continue reading, they would be keeping the events of Daniel chapter 2 firmly in mind, looking for any differences or similarities between the two accounts. And we're going to approach this in exactly the same way. Now what this is going to do is going to show us why the symbols are the way they are. Because if you think about the symbols in Daniel chapter 2, they're very different than the symbols in Daniel chapter 7. And we're going to be learning from that. As we go through it, we're going to see that they speak of the same sort of prophecy. But the differences are something that we can learn from. Continuing the text, and this is going to be a long reading. Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And four great beasts were coming out of the sea, different from one another. And the four beasts were coming up from the sea. I'm sorry, I read the same line again. The first was like a lion and had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked and was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind was also given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, resembling a bear, and it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth, and thus they said to it, Arise, devour much meat. After this I kept looking, and behold, another one, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I kept looking in the night visions, behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong, and had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and it was different from the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Now, the parallelism continues from the first verse in this. There are a series of 4 symbols so far. A series of 4 symbols. Now, the symbols in Daniel chapter 2 were a great statue, a fantastic statue, awesome in appearance, made out of 4 precious metals. Gold, silver, bronze, and iron. Okay? 4 important metals. It was a magnificent vision of the glories of the coming kingdoms, right? This one was very different. Instead of being told of the glories of the kingdom, the kingdoms are portrayed as beasts. Disgusting, terrifying beasts. Instead of the head of gold that Nebuchadnezzar told, you are the head of gold, we see a winged lion that is radically altered into a man to humble it. And what happened to King Nebuchadnezzar before he died? He grew prideful, thought that he was great, and God humbled him for it. In other words, he wasn't thinking like a man, and then God made him think like a man. Instead, moving on, to the Medial Persians, instead of chests and arms of silver, the Medial Persians are seen as a lopsided bear with 3 ribs in its teeth. A lopsided carnivorous beast. Moving on, instead of the belly and thighs of bronze, Alexander's Greeks are seen as a 4-headed, 4-winged leopard to whom dominion is given. A terrifying predator to whom dominion is given. If you think about it, that's pretty scary. And Rome is seen, instead of flakes of iron mixed with clay, Rome is seen as a dreadful and extremely strong beast with teeth of iron and 10 horns. Do you see how the symbols are different? To a Hebrew mind, they're going to immediately see the difference. The Hebrew reader would immediately see the antithesis in these things, and then he begin to ask why the differences. That's the natural question that the Hebrew mind would be asking. He would also note another difference.